Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, and welcome to Datamine's webinar, Managing Environmental and Heritage Risks with Geofencing. Before we start, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land of the Whadjuk people and the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'm Peter Brammall, and I'm the Strategic and Support Officer for LandTrack Systems. I've provided professional tenement advice to LandTrack Systems, and I do quite a few of the training courses. I've been in the industry since 1986, and I've been working in tenements and providing professional advice to the mining industry since 1996. You'll hear from my colleague Tim, but I'll let him introduce himself when he's actually on. The first map here is historical language groups across WA. The next one's a native title map across WA. So as you can see, there's lots of groups, conflicting groups, which makes it very hard. But there's 38,000 registered heritage sites across WA, and that's more tenements than there is in WA. There's 35,000 tenements in WA. So it gives you an insight into the complexity facing explorers in WA, and the complexity that faced the ACH Act when it was commenced in July 2023. Roger Cook, the Premier, announced the repeal of the Act in 8th of August and is reinstating the 1972 Act with some amendments. With a little bit of understanding of the Act and what they were trying to do with the new Act, you can probably guess what they're going to do. So under the 1972 Act, the definition of Aboriginal heritage was all places that Aboriginals use for traditional culture, sacred or ritual or ceremonial sites, and all objects, whether natural or artificial, and sacred and ritual or ceremonial significance to Aboriginal persons use for traditional cultural life. And if you've ever been out in a survey, you know there's flints and grinding stones and rocks just lying everywhere. So of that 38,000 sites, there'll be quite a few added. And Roger Cook said the government's going to do all the heritage surveys for farmers. Yeah, we'll see if that happens. Under the new Act, under the repealed Act of 2021, this was the definition of Aboriginal cultural heritage. And we can expect that definition will flow through to the update of the 1972 Act. I'd be very surprised if they don't. And it's basically the intangible elements that'll have the most influence. This is a map of all the dreaming paths across Australia, and you'll see quite a few dreaming paths in WA. And once you get down to the granular level, there'll be even more. The penalties in the repealed Act are these particular ones. You can expect these will get put into the updated 1972 Act. I'd be very, very surprised if they didn't. And as you can see, for a corporation, they're quite large. You know, $5 million for and daily penalties of 250,000. So damaging a heritage site will be very expensive. And with the reversion to the 1972 Act, there's still an obligation not to disturb heritage sites. It doesn't just disappear by reverting to the 1972 Act. So it's still quite relevant. Why the industry wasn't so, I'm not saying everyone in the industry, but why the repeal of the Act is not so significant is because under the Native Title Act, if you want your tenement granted, it had to go through the Future Act process. And the Future Act process is any land tenure has to, or especially P's and E's, had to follow the expedited procedure. This was agreed by the law courts, Commonwealth law courts, or the right to negotiate process for mining leases. For the expedite procedure, you have the regional state heritage agreement that you sign and send to the local Aboriginal body, or you can enter into an Indigenous land use agreement with the Aboriginal body. Failure to do the process and the MEARS will not grant your tenement. It will be deemed invalid. So what do these agreements contain? They actually contain, and most importantly, that you'll undertake a heritage survey and avoid all heritage sites. So you've got a contractual obligation to avoid heritage sites. There's quite a few other clauses in the agreements, access and compensation, employments, and grant of tenements. And the regional state heritage agreements and the ILUAs require you to undertake a heritage survey before the ground disturbing work is undertaken within a tenement and within a proposed area of disturbance. This is so important. Otherwise, you'll end up like Rio Tinto. They destroyed the Duketon Gorge. The MD was forced to resign, fell on his sword, even though he got a $42 million payout. But it destroyed their ESG consciousness and institutional investors, and they leaned pretty hard on that. So Tim's going to take up his slides now.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I'll just share my screen. All right, thanks for that, Peter. Yeah, just a little bit about myself. Been with Datamine and affiliated companies for over 15 years. Product owner of Discover MapInfo and Discover Mobile. And yeah, I'm a geologist by training, graduated from La Trobe Uni and worked out in industry for probably about 8 years or so before my current career. All right, so geofencing, how can that help us with things that Peter's discussed? Firstly, what is geofencing? Well, over to the right here, you see a image and it's a restricted area. Might be cultural heritage, might be environmental. And what it is, geofencing is basically a virtual perimeter defined by a polygon for a real world geographical area. So it's a little bit of a mouthful, but essentially you have a polygon in your GIS layers, and when you're out in the field, where is that polygon? And you want to know when you enter it or when you exit that polygon. And that's where geofencing is very useful. So the geofencing combines the user's current location and with the proximity of that particular polygon. They're always defined by polygons, geofences. Okay, so why use geofencing? Well, you can go about your daily tasks and not have to worry about looking at where that geofence is. It's just there and you get alerts when you've entered it or whether you've exited, etc. So as you can see on the image on the right here, you've got might be a tree of significance, might be, like a scar tree or something like that. We've put a buffer around it as determined by that darker blue area. And that blue dot there, that might be my current location. So I've entered into that buffer zone. And then all of a sudden I get these warnings, I get flashing, I get audible sounds, etc. And that persists until you get out of that area. So that's an advantage of using geofencing. So you don't have to worry where these geofences are. When you get into them, you sure know because you get alerted, you get all these messages popping up and they stay until you get out. All right, so real world uses of geofencing. Well, it's basically up to the user how you want to use geofencing. Like not in our industry, it's also used in marketing, sort of catchment areas for marketing. That's one example. But for our industry, for exploration, there's many practical applications for geofencing. One of the big ones, as Peter went through, are preventing financial mistakes. Things like you might be able to go on Crown land and you've got a 200-metre buffer, something like that. Where is that buffer? if I start sampling or drilling in that, there could be financial repercussions for it, or cultural heritage areas or environmental protected areas. So it's good to know these things. And also it just helps you with your workflow. You might want to be contained within an area. So some examples of its uses, you get alerts and warnings when you enter a restricted area, which is environmentally sensitive or culturally significant. Another one is, like I said, if you're in a defined area, so you may have a sort of a catchment area that you want to do your sampling, and you want to know, am I out of that area where I shouldn't be doing my sampling? So you get alerts and warnings and all sorts of things like that. All right, configuring geofencing. That can be done both on the desktop, so in this case, MapInfo Discover, or you can do it directly in mobile. So it's quite flexible. So you can create the geofence layers on the desktop. You can copy layers. Also within Discover Mobile, you can create layers on the fly, and you can also copy layers from an existing one of your other polygon layers. They might be cadastre boundaries, might be cultural areas, etc. And what things can you configure? You can configure the sound. So these things can all be turned off and on within Discover Mobile. Message boxes, flashing of the polygons and the map as well, and also buffers. The buffers is sort of an interesting thing. Like I said, you've got a polygon, and you may want to have a buffer zone around that polygon, because you may not be able to enter within a buffer zone of the exact polygon. So that's another interesting sort of configuration. All right, so what I'll go through, I just got a little video here of configuring and also showing you a real life example in the field. So I'll just go through that, and I'll just sort of stop and start that a little bit and just talk through it. All right, so just here, this is Discover for MapInfo, and we've got our mobile project here. So you may be familiar with setting it up. I won't go through this process in this webinar, but with a mobile project, you get a geofence layer. That's a default layer. And you can name things, you can put comments in there, and there's also a buffer field there. So you can put in a value. In this case, you might have to squint a bit, but it's 10. I'll put a buffer of 10. That'll be 10 meters. So it's whatever your like coordinate system or whatever units you're dealing with, that'll be in that system. So I'll just go through, put in some values there. This can all be done on the mobile application as well, but it's just showing you the flexibility of it. So I've entered those buffer values. I'm just going to save it. Okay, and now we're going to go through the process of sending that project out to your mobile devices. I'll just pause it there for a second. We've got two different methods of sending out a project to a mobile device. We've got file transfer, which does your cloud drives, might be Dropbox, iCloud, etc. Or you can do Wi-Fi sync. The Wi-Fi sync, that's a very handy one. You can just be on the same Wi-Fi network. Don't have to have the internet, so it can be out on a remote camp. Or you can just set up a hotspot between your computer and your mobile device. And it's a very fast way of transferring your project. So let that go through. So there's not too many things you have to do. Just click a couple of dialogues and out you go. So this is detecting your particular devices. Select it and then just sync it. So you can see it's a very quick process. I haven't sped this up. This is real time. Just look for the device again. So I'm going to transfer it to another one. So you can have projects on multiple devices. All right, so I'll show you an example out in the field of what we can do. This is a do not enter configuration. So what that will be is you'll have polygons, and I don't want to enter them. So they may be culturally significant, they might be environmentally sensitive areas, etc. And I want to know when I'm entering or about to enter those areas. So this is on Discover Mobile. This is the Android version. So what we can see here is we've got I'll just show you, you've got the blue polygons there on the geofence. You can see by the colors in the layer control there. And you've got that small circular area, and that might be like a scar tree or something, some sort of area of significance you don't want to enter. And that's on another layer. So I'm just going to show you how you can copy it within Discover Mobile from one layer into the geofence layer. So all you need to do is you tap on that object, make that layer editable. So I tap on it, brings up the data entry, and you'll just see there, I've got a copy button. I click that and it says, do you want to copy this polygon to the geofence layer? So it's a very, very simple process. So now I've got that layer from, or that object, from one layer into the geofence. And you always have to operate off the geofence layer. It can just be a temporary layer. And that now I'm just using, there's a text feature in Discover Mobile. So I can turn that on and I can tap on the different objects and I can see the attributes. So you can see their significant river red gum stand. So I just want to see what those geofence polygons are. Okay, just tapping around. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to activate the geofence. So we've got the layers and now we want to essentially turn them on. You've got a icon up the top left. It's a pin drop with a circle. That's the geofence layer. So you need to tap on that. Okay, then it says select the geofence polygons you want to use. So I just tap away on those. You can select as many as you want. And then you click the activate button to the right. And as you can see there, I'll just pause that for a sec. You've got your geofence polygon on the right, and then there's a darker blue perimeter, and that's the buffer. So that's that 10-meter buffer that I wanted to put around that area. And now what I'm going to do is configure that. So I'm going to change that buffer value on Discover Mobile. I showed you before on the desktop. Now it's within Discover Mobile. So there's no buffers around them. And what I want to do is around that tree, I want to put a larger buffer and I want to decrease the buffer on the polygon to the right that's got the trees. So you need to disable the geofence. Just basically click on that button up the top again. That's how you enable it and disable it. So there's that buffer. I'm just going to change that to 5. It's a bit too large. Okay, and then I'm going to go to that cultural heritage tree and I'm going to put a buffer on that. So we'll just put an ACH there. And then, yep, so just want to have a look. And now we want to put a buffer around it. We'll go about 10 meters on that one. All right, so click on that button up the top, the geofence one, select the layers or objects, and then we click activate. And now you can see there's a decreased buffer on that polygon to the right and an increased one there is a buffer now. And this is the settings that you can go to. So just fast forward it a bit there. But you can configure the geofence settings using the button up the top right in the screen. There's 3 buttons. And the geofence one, you've got 2 options here, alert do not enter or warning on entry and exit. The alert do not enter is if you go into an area, there's a persistent warning, bips and messages, and they don't go until you leave that area. The warning on entry and exit is if you cross over the perimeter of that geofence, you're warned or told. And then you can turn those sounds and message and flashing off. That's what I was saying before. Okay. So yeah, it's all fairly easy to configure. You can configure that while the geofencing's going. That's all fine. Okay. All right, so next step is you've got your blue dot, which is your current location in Discover Mobile, and we're going to start walking around here. So I'll zoom in a little bit. That red dot's just a sample location. So I don't want to sample within these areas. So this is why I need to have these geofence layers turned on. So that buffer zone essentially acts as the geofenced area now. It sort of extends it. You don't have to have buffers, but it's just showing you an example. And what you'll see in a second is the map will flash red. You won't be able to hear the sound, but there's a very annoying buzzing noise. And you've got that red flashing, and you've also got messaging. That can all be configured. So I hop out of that area and then it goes, and that's persistent until you hop out. So it should give you enough warning. So now I'm wandering around and I accidentally go into the area which is environmentally sensitive. And I step into that buffer. And once again, I get those warnings triggered, flashing and messages and sounds. So this is the do not enter mode. And there's a second mode I'm just going to show you. That's the entry warning on entry and exit. Okay, so over this area, I want to do some sampling, and this is my contained sampling area. So I go into the settings. There's a geofence setting, and I toggle it to warning on entry and exit. Okay, so I want to stay within this area and want to be told if I'm outside this area. This isn't persistent, you just get some messaging. So I've just sampled, just taken a sample there. All right, so now I'm wandering around this area and I want to do some more sampling. However, I want to see if I'm within that area. So I've activated that geofenced area. And because it's activated, it's just told me I'm in that area. That's why it's flashing. So I wander around, I want to take another sample and I want to be alerted if I've actually gone out of my area where I should be. So I go over the perimeter and you can see you've exited the geofence zone, the polygon flashes, and you get an audible noise. And then that's telling how I exited. Now it's telling me that I've entered back into the geofence zone. So it's showing you the two different methods that we have with geofencing. Okay. So what's coming in geofencing? So I showed you the two different options there. It was warning on do not enter, and there's also the warning when I cross over the perimeter of the geofence. So what's coming? These are pretty much just in testing now, so they'll be out in the next probably week or two. But you've got the ability to select all polygons. At the moment, you have to do it individually. So if you've got a lot of polygons you want to select, you've got to go through and individually select them, and that might be a bit of a pain. So you just click the select all, but just be cautious with that. If you've got some might be tenements or cultural areas, and you've got 10,000 polygons, yeah, just be careful. It can slow things down a little bit if you're trying to do that many. That's usually pretty good. The next one is the opposite of the do not enter, and that's the the sort of do not exit. So sort of what I showed you in that last video, but when you get out of that area, there's persistent warnings and beeps. So you want to stay in that area. And if you do get out of that area, there's persistence to the warnings. The second option I showed you of the do not enter and exit, or the enter and exit, that will only sort of gives you a temporary sort of warning, but it's not persistent. So these are the new options that are coming, and they should be coming in the next couple of weeks, if even that. That concludes the presentation. So thanks for spending your time to have a look at some of the systems we've got here and some of the tools that we've got for our users.